Okay, Chapter 21, Income Inequality, Poverty, and Discrimination. Okay, so the average household income in 2011 was almost $70,000, and it's among the highest in the world. And so, the U.S. is considered a rich country, a developed country. And one way that income inequality is measured is through distribution by quintiles. And we will see this in a couple of slides. Also, there's a lot of income mobility in the United States, and that's the ability for people to move from one quintile to another. So, it could be you start off at your first job from college and, you're making a lower income, and then as you reach middle age, your income is higher, and income keeps rising until around the time of retirement, and then income falls. So you can, start off in the second 20%, move up to the third 20%, fourth to the highest, and then fall back down. What does help reduce income inequality is government redistribution. So taxes and transfer payments help transfer income from the highest 20%, the fourth 20%, for example, to the lowest 20% of households. Okay, so 13.5% of all households make under $15,000 of income, and then 11.5% make between $15,000 and $24,000 and $999,000, and then so on. But you can see here that 21% of all households make $100,000 or more. Okay, and so we look at quintiles. So the lowest 20% of income earners, their income, if you add it up all together, is 3.2% of total income in the United States. And then the second 20%, okay, the income they make is 8.4% of the total income United States. And then you can see here that the highest 20% of income earners in the whole population, their income makes up 51.1% of total income. So we do have some inequality going on in the United States. If there was equal income equality, then the lowest 20%, second 20%, third 20%, fourth 20%, highest 20%, okay, they would all be making the same, and percentage of total income would all be 20%. Okay, so this brings us to the Lorenz curve and the Gini ratio. Okay, so perfect inequality is the blue line. It is perfectly linear, as you can see, where, as discussed earlier, for example, 20% of households would produce, or the first 20% would produce 20% of the income, okay, and then the next 20% of households would produce an additional 20% of total income, etc. Okay, but in reality, okay, we are at the Lorenz curve, which is the red curve over here. The closer the Lorenz curve is to the perfect equality line, then the less income inequality there exists, and the further bowed out it is from the perfect equality line, the more income inequality that exists. And so the Gini ratio would be area A, which is this area here, divided by area A plus area B. Okay, and area B is this area here. Okay, and so the Gini ratio, the lower it is, the more income equality there is, and then the higher the Gini ratio is, then the more income inequality there is. Okay, and so Because taxes and transfers redistribute income from the highest earners to the lowest earners, income is redistributed a little bit. So after taxes, the Lorentz curve is closer to the perfect equality line. Okay, so there's several causes of income inequality. First is ability. We don't all get paid the same because we all have different abilities. So, not all of us can be a mega basketball star or a mega pop star. I know for sure I cannot be a mega pop star at all. I don't have that ability. And so, people with extreme talents, get compensated more for them. Also, people with more education and more training tend to have higher incomes and need to be compensated for all those years of school. Unfortunately, some of it is because of discrimination, and we'll talk about that a bit later. And then there's also preferences and risks. So, some households prefer to have like a stay-at-home mom, and so their incomes will be lower than households where they have two working parents. And then some people also are willing to take more risks with their money, and so they can earn a lot more of their risk or sometimes lose everything. There's also an unequal distribution of wealth. So a retired person might have a very low income or no income. However, they may own a lot. They may own their own home, land, etc. Whereas a person just out of school might be making a lot more money, but they don't have any wealth yet. Okay, they don't own anything. Like they don't have a house, for example, in their name or anything. Some professions earn more because they have more market power because of occupational licensing. So, lawyers need a license to practice, doctors need a license to practice as well. And then, of course, there's always luck, connections, and misfortune. Never know what life will bring. And some people have great luck and their house happened to be sitting, for example, on oil, or they win the lottery. And then other people earn a great job because of who they know. And then other people, unfortunately, have misfortune and their income is reduced by death or illness or some unforeseen circumstance. So we can see some inequality going on here. So in Colombia, okay, almost 50% of total income goes to the top 1/10 of income receivers. Whereas in Japan, that number drops to just above 20%. So there's a lot more inequality in Colombia and South Africa, for example, than there is in Sweden, Germany, or Japan. Inequality has been rising since 1975. Now, the real wages of the highest 20% and the lowest 20% have been rising. However, the wages of the highest 20% have been rising faster than the wages of the lowest 20%. One cause of this is that the U.S. economy has changed. We went from agricultural-based economy to manufacturing-based economy to now a services-based economy. And service jobs tend to pay more than manufacturing job and agricultural jobs. So, accountants, lawyers, doctors make more, for example, than machinists. And so as our economy has moved towards more service-oriented work, there's been a greater demand for highly skilled workers that have degrees, for example, in training. Also, there's been a lot of demographic changes in the U.S. In the 70s and 80s, there was a large entrance of less experienced baby boomers coming into the labor force, and so that contributed to income inequality as well. And also, there's been an increase in households headed by single women, and households that are headed by a single woman tend to make less money than households where there's both parents present or where there's just a single male present. Also, immigration and international trade have forced wages downward in certain industry. Also, some of the lower wage jobs have been transferred to developing countries where companies can pay those workers less. There's also been a decline in unionism in the United States, and so workers have seen a drop in pay because of that. Usually union workers make a higher wage than non-union workers. Okay, so we can see the lowest 20%. Their share of total income has been dropping with a small rise here in 2011, the effect of the recession. The second 20%, same thing except for 2011. Okay. Then the highest 20% has been rising. 2011, it was a drop. The recession hit everyone hard. The one group that stayed very consistent is the fourth 20%. So there is a trade-off between equality and efficiency when we talk about income inequality, and that to make a society have higher income inequality, it comes at the cost of efficiency. Okay, so let's say we have $10,000 of income, and let's say $2,500 is given to Anderson and $7,500 is given to Brooks. Okay, so marginal utility here could be gained if Brooks gave $2,500 to Anderson, and that way both incomes were to be equal at $5,000. Then there would be a gain in utility, and it's this entire blue area right here. So that is Anderson's increase in utility from receiving income from Brooks. However, if you look on the right, this is Brooks' marginal utility from income, and he has a utility loss from having to give some of his income to Anderson. So critics would say that Brooks then, maybe he earned a higher income because he has more education, more training, a higher talent. In other words, he produces more output, and this redistribution of income is a disincentive. Let's say he has to pay a lot higher taxes because of it, and the theory is that he will lose motivation since a lot of his income differential goes to taxes and redistribution, and therefore will not be as productive. So it comes at cost at efficiency. However, what the model does show, though, is that the total gain from redistributing income is actually greater than the loss of redistributing income. Okay. So definition of poverty in 2011, okay, a single person making less than $11,702 a year, family of 4 less than $22,891, and family of 6 less than $29,494. So in 2011, about 46.2 million Americans were living in poverty, so the poverty rate was 15%. The percentage of single females heading a household living in poverty was over 30%. African Americans was about 27%, and then followed by Hispanics, and then after that you have children. So it is alarming how many children are living in poverty, because usually what we see is poverty begets poverty, and it's very hard for them to grow up and make enough money to not be in poverty. Poverty started declining in 1959, and it declined all the way through 1969 and then stabilized in 11 to 13% range. And of course, with recession, it does rise. So in the Great Recession, as we saw in 2011, it was 15%. There are some issues in measuring poverty. And first one is that, the government defined a specific income threshold. So like a family of 4, if they're earning $22,000 a year or less, they are, considered to be living in poverty. But if they're earning $30,000 a year, then they're not considered to be living in poverty. However, $30,000 might be able to let you survive in a city like Houston. But if you were to move to a city like San Francisco or New York City, then $30,000 for a family of four would be very, very little, and they would be living in poverty. So it's easy to miss this. And then also, if poverty is measured by income. However, if you were to look at consumption, it would take some of those households out of poverty because their income might be low, but they may be drawing on savings that they have. They could also be borrowing against future income or selling their homes or etc. Okay, so poverty for all groups dropped in the 90s, and then you could see in the Great Recession it rose over here. But we see that the number of African Americans living in poverty has declined significantly compared to the past. Okay. The U.S., especially for being a developed country, has a high level of poverty, higher than most other developed countries. However, with that said, the U.S. does have a number of anti-poverty programs, entitlement programs, and these are programs that offer aid to people that are eligible. So these, if they're eligible for whatever reason, it could be low income, it could be a disability, then they are entitled to that money. So we have some social insurance programs such as Social Security. So Social Security provides income to retired persons or to the spouse of someone that dies. It also provides income to disabled persons as well. And so when someone retires, their income is limited, and so this helps give them a little bit of extra income. So for workers that didn't have a large savings for retirement, this helps them immensely. And Medicare is a federal insurance program that provides health insurance to people 65 or older or disabled people. Unemployment compensation is if someone is laid off, unemployed, then for a short period of time they can get some money from the government to help meet their income needs while they look for another job. And then some public assistance programs, this is welfare, and this program provides income to households that have dependent children, and either the income of the household is low or there is no income coming to that household, or the head of the household is disabled. Okay. For workers that do not qualify for Social Security, however, they do need some income assistance because they could be at an older age, disabled, blind, just if they're not able to work and they don't qualify for Social Security, then they can receive some money through the Supplemental Security Income Program. The temporary assistance for needy families is the welfare program in the United States. In '96, it was reformed to have tighter requirements. So now there's a lifetime limit of 5 years on being able to receive welfare. And it does require that adults that are not disabled, that they work after receiving assistance for 2 years. They ended food stamp eligibility for people that are able to work between the age of 18 to 50 that don't have any children. And then they also narrowed down the definition of what exactly is a disabled child, whereas before the definition was very broad and vague. And then for new legal immigrants that are not citizens, they have to wait 5 years before they are eligible for any type of benefits. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that's the food stamp program. These are given to low income households or people, and they receive a debit card, They're called electronic benefit transfer cards. And the way the cards are designed is that the money can only be spent on food. And then Medicaid provides medical insurance to low-income households. And then the earned income tax credit is given to low-income earners. With this, it reduces the total amount of taxes owed, or in some cases, they actually get money back. If the credit is greater than their tax liability, then they'll receive a cash payment as well. Low income earners tend to receive benefits from entitlement programs, so it doesn't make sense to have them pay taxes on their incomes as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about discrimination. And what discrimination is at its core is treating someone inferior based on a certain characteristic, whether it be their race, their gender, or some other characteristic the person cannot change. And so the taste for discrimination model assumes that people who have prejudices have disutility or receive disutility when they interact with the person that they have a prejudice against. Okay. And so they are willing to pay in order to avoid interactions with a certain group of people that they are prejudiced against. And the discrimination coefficient measures the amount of prejudice. So if it's $0 and there's absolutely no prejudice, if it's infinity, then this person would not hire the group that they're prejudiced against at all, under no circumstance. So we assume here that it's a white employer and they're prejudiced against African Americans. And so an example of discrimination coefficient is if the white wage is $10 and the African American wage is $8, okay, they would rather hire the white person, and the discrimination coefficient is $2. Okay, they're willing to pay in order $2 more per hour in order to avoid interactions with the group that they're prejudiced against. Let's look at this in graph form. Okay, so if the employer is prejudiced against African Americans and the demand for African Americans starting off at D1 shifts to the left at D2, and what happens is that the wage rate for African Americans drops. Since there's less African Americans employed, they're willing to take a lower wage in order to find work. So if the original African American to white wage ratio at D1, okay, African Americans got paid $8, whites got paid 10, so the ratio is 4/5, but with discrimination, the ratio is reduced further. However, if there's less discrimination and the employer hires more African American workers and D1 goes to D3, okay, then the wage, the wage goes up to $9, equilibrium wage, and the ratio increases to 9/10. Okay, so a higher ratio indicates less discrimination. Some discrimination occurs because a person is judged on an average group characteristic. So for example, a lot of people say that the reason why women get paid less than men is because they're not hired as much, and they're discriminated against because women are more likely than men to quit their jobs eventually to take care of children, for example, and also they are less willing to move on average for a job. Now, if one woman's being interviewed, she may not fit that stereotype. She may not even want children. She'd be willing to move anywhere, but she gets judged on that. The employer assumes she will do all those things and instead hires a male worker. In this case, statistical discrimination occurs because the employer is looking to maximize profit, but they're not doing it out of malicious intent. Okay. There's been a lot of discussion about discrimination due to an average group characteristics. Okay, so occupational segregation, and this is the crowding of women, African Americans, and certain ethnic groups into lower paying jobs. And this is still happening here in the US economy. And so we're going to look at the crowding model. And so we're going to assume, okay, that the labor force is equally divided between men and women. So there's 6 million male workers, 6 million female workers. And there's 3 occupations, X, Y, and Z. We're also going to assume that men and women have the same labor force characteristics. And so each of these 3 occupations, like a man or a woman, could equally do a good job. Okay, so we're going to look at the effects of occupational crowding. Okay, so let's say all women are crowded into occupation Z over here. Okay, so all 6 million women are working here and their wage is very low compared to if both men and women were in occupation Z. And so occupation X and Y only have men. And so here at 3 million men, 3 million women. And so the wage for males is higher than if there were males and females in occupation X and occupation Y. Okay. And so what we see here is a loss of output because if you remember, demand for labor is equal to the marginal revenue product. And so if there was no occupational segregation, if it was ended, then in each of these occupations, okay, the wage would be the same and the marginal revenue product would be maximized. Whereas with occupational segregation, there is a loss of output due to the segregation. So there has been discussion of legislation to help eliminate occupational segregation, or at least to reduce it. Okay, this concludes chapter 21.